Okay, I see that Congressman Welch has joined the call. So let's get started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this call. My name is Rebecca Ellis, and I'm the State Director for Congressman Welch, and I'll be moderating today. And as you know, the focus of today's call is municipal budgets and how they've been impacted by COVID-19. So I'll quickly go over the run of show and some logistics, and then we'll get started. So we'll start this morning with remarks from Congressman Welch, and then we have some invited guests who will help us start the conversation. The invited guests are Maura Carroll, the Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Burlington Mayor Miro Weinberger, Danville Select Board Chair Ken Lindsley, and the West Fairleigh Select Board Chair Delcy Hoyt. And then we'll open up the conversation to questions and answers. And for some logistics, I'll be trying to moderate, and so please use the chat function or the Zoom's raise your hand function to ask questions, and I will call on you. And we're scheduled to be on this call until about 12 o'clock today. And if we don't get to your question, feel free to contact me after the call. If you're not speaking, please keep your audio on mute to limit the background noise. And obviously when you are speaking, unmute yourself so that we can hear you. And to use Zoom's raise your hand function, you can find that by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen labeled participants. And then at least when I tried to do this right now, I had to click on the three buttons that are there for extra functions, and then you'll see a button that says raise hand. And hopefully that will work, and I will see that your hand is raised. That doesn't work, feel free to go into the chat function and put in a question. And so finally, I just want to note that we've invited press to be on today's call, and that I believe that Channel 17 may be live streaming the call, though I'm not sure I see them right at the moment. But with that, thanks for joining, and I'll turn it over to Congressman Welch.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I want to thank all of the officials who are on this call today. And I really want to thank you for the extraordinary challenge that you're facing and facing with such determination. I mean, this is so tough. With school just starting, I just keep thinking of all the parents that I talk to and who you serve, and they're just wrestling, as our school boards are, with this extraordinarily difficult personal issue about, do we send our kids back to school? And each school district is, of course, making these decisions. But it is just another indication of how long and how challenging it is for us to, as a society, deal with this once in 100-year event. And, you know, our kids need school, we know that, but our parents need school. I mean, it's a time when all parents have some confidence their kids are okay, and it gives them time, obviously, to work and to be able to do the things they need to do. And I can only imagine, given your jobs, how much you're hearing about that from all the citizens that you serve. The second thing is that the impact on our communities is in the ecosystem in our communities is something that is really concerning to me. And I'm not sure that we have addressed that in a way that we're going to have to. And let me give an example. We've got community newspapers, and they've never been more valuable and more needed to get news out. There's a huge desire for news, but their revenues have plunged. They started out in a tough spot, but the restaurants that would advertise don't have any revenues, so they're imperiled. Our restaurants, which are so important to local life, are under obviously enormous pressure because people really can't go there until they're confident that they'll be healthy. Our nonprofits, you know, I know Mayor Weinberger's on here, but like the Flynn, those depend, and you've got nonprofits in your community that depend on local contributions, but also selling tickets. And then we've got live music venues. And one of the things, I'm just talking about this because it's something that I've been thinking about down the line. When we get to the other side of this, those local institutions, those local businesses that made so much of a contribution to the quality and the richness of community life, those are going to be the last to open. And we, I think, have to find ways to be helpful to them so that when we get to the other side, they're going to be there to restore that richness to our community. Now, let me just talk a little bit about where we are on the COVID negotiations. You can't do anything without getting money from the federal government. I understand that. And my view on this from the beginning has been that the federal government is the only fiscal entity that has the flexibility and the capacity to provide the financial wherewithal to help our communities, to help our small businesses, and to help our individuals. And my view on this has always been that if we're going to make a mistake in Washington, and we will, it's got to be to err on the side of too much too soon, not too little too late. And I absolutely believe that first and foremost, there's got to be a good health response. There hasn't been in many parts of the country, and I think at the federal level, there has been in many states like Vermont, where we're very fortunate that with the combination of leadership from the governor and also the cooperation of citizens, we've been doing everything we can with some success, great success, to lower our infection rate. That's tremendous, and we've got to keep our vigilance up. But there's got to be a continued response economically from the federal government. The negotiations that are underway right now have been stalled. And the latest I have is that there is positive vibes coming from Speaker Pelosi and to some extent the White House. And the negotiations right now are essentially between Senator Schumer in the Senate, Speaker Pelosi, and then the White House represented by Secretary Treasury Mnuchin and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. And the Senate Republicans under Senator McConnell, by his own acknowledgement, are so divided they have not presented a plan. That's really bad because bottom line, we know that more aid is needed, particularly since the spike in infections has risen dramatically, starting to come down just a little bit nationally, but it's still up. So we passed in the House a $3 trillion package, and it would be enormously important to your communities that we get as much of that signed by the president as possible, because in that package, there's $3 billion that would come to the state and to our municipalities. And I think our office has shared with you how much each of your communities would get. But it would be about $2.5 billion that would go to the state and about $500 million that would go to your communities to be allocated, as I think we sent out a spreadsheet on. And that would be with considerable flexibility. So I see that as something that's absolutely essential. You know, how we're going to design a response. We know that your revenues have collapsed, the state revenues have collapsed, and we have to provide some assistance so that you can continue to meet the needs that are significant in each of your communities. Even though there is a lot of division, you know, Senator McConnell had said on this second aid package that he wanted to tap the brakes. He's now acknowledging that we need more aid. But as you may remember, he famously suggested that with respect to state aid, that states could consider bankruptcy as an option. That's a disaster. I mean, the revenue hemorrhage for states significantly is related to the COVID collapse. You know, in Vermont, we may lose about $500 million, $500 million of revenue next year. So we've got to be all in on this. And I say that because it's enough for families to be contending with the anxiety of whether they or somebody in their family, someone they love, is going to get sick. It's really tough on our small businesses, as you know, particularly those businesses like our community newspapers, like our restaurants, like our nonprofits that are really so important to the quality of community life. And you're bearing the brunt of that. You're on the front lines trying to help people get through. And I want to be there with you and do everything I can in Washington, along with Senator Sanders and Senator Leahy, to get the resources back to you so that you have a shot at coming out on the other side and reviving the strength of our communities. Thank you very much for being here, and I really look forward to your questions and comments.
So first up, we have Maura Carroll from Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Hi, Maura.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks very much. And thank you, Congressman Welch, for having this meeting. We really appreciate your openness to listening to the concerns of local officials. And we, of course, think that that is critical at this stage in the process. In May, VLCT sent out a survey to members asking for information about what municipalities were seeing in terms of revenue loss through the pandemic. Of course, it was early in the pandemic, and so many municipalities did not have hard data. So we asked people to estimate as best they could. About 60% of our members responded to that survey, and approximately half of those responding indicate that they expect some revenue reduction. But many won't know the extent of that until property tax payments are due this fall. To be fair, almost a quarter said they did not see any reduction in fiscal year 20 and were not anticipating reductions in 21. But 66% of those responding feared a loss of revenue from tickets or penalties, some sort of fees, 48% from utilities, water, sewer, and other services, 45% from activities and programs like recreation programs, and over 21% from local option taxes. The survey was done at a time when most municipal offices were closed. And we asked for an estimate of what people were spending on COVID-related expenses. And the total response at that point, probably a month and a half into the pandemic, was about $1.6 million, which was an average of $33,000 per municipality. Now, we know those costs are going to go up as municipalities continue to open their doors. We need additional PPE. Obviously, we've had to expend money on remote meeting software and other software devices. Cleaning and custodial services have increased. And many municipalities, instead of furloughing or laying off, continue to pay their employees even though they were not working. Mm-hmm. Some cost savings were anticipated, but the responses indicated that unanticipated expenses exceeded those cost savings. Municipalities have been receiving requests from both residents and businesses for residential and commercial property tax relief. It's been hard to compile accurate data with so much uncertainty, so we are turning this survey into a quarterly assessment of where municipalities are with regard to expenses. We're currently compiling the second installment, so we should have those answers soon. And if anyone wants to see the results of the first survey, you can find that on our website. It's under the Municipal Assistance Center. If you have any problem finding it, we'll send you a link to that. And finally, I would add, just as a contextual issue, when the CARES Act money was distributed to state, Secretary Mnuchin suggested that states share 45% of that money with cities and towns. In Vermont, we are receiving roughly 1%. So putting that in context, Clearly that's not enough. And the flexibility of the CARES Act money is also not going to be enough. So I'm very encouraged to hear you say that you have a commitment to seeing that local aid comes back, and appreciate that very, very much, Congressman. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, really excellent report. I really appreciate the gathering of that data that puts us on the same page so that we know what we're talking about rather than speculating. But thank you.
You're welcome.
So next we invited Mayor Weinberger to give us some perspective on the city of Burlington and their budget process.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Congressman Welch. It's great to see you. Thank you for convening again municipal leaders to discuss where we're at in this incredible moment. I get to work with Maura with my VLCT hat on, and I think she, as usual, as always, summarized well the kind of statewide perspective. I will just share some specifics about how Burlington is, where we're at financially, and what kind of impact the current situation is starting to have on us, and the uncertainty around relief. I think Burlington is somewhat, as I guess is not unusual in Vermont municipal discussions, some of what we're experiencing is unique to Burlington. I do think in some ways what I'm going to describe for you here in Burlington is a leading indicator of what other municipalities will face as we get that secure significant revenues from visitors and tourists, but that weren't the ski towns that were largely spared the COVID impacts last year, maybe looking at impacts like this going forward. Here's what I'm talking about. We just had to pass a budget we passed it the last possible moment, about 90 minutes before the fiscal year ended, as in itself a reflection of just how challenging it was to manage city finances in this moment of uncertainty. That budget assumed a 13% reduction in revenues for the city in the year ahead. Burlington secures a lot of money from visitors between our gross receipts taxes, which on hotels and rooms and beverages, marina fees, waterfront event fees, camping fees. We have our own municipal campground. All those revenues have been devastated in what is for us the final quarter, final quarter of FY20, and then we're projecting that 13% reduction for all of the fiscal year that began for us on July 1st. We dealt with that through a combination of painfully dipping into rainy day funds, reserves that we built up over the last 8 years. We are currently under a hiring freeze and have been for months. Vacancies are building up, and there's greater strain on remaining employees that is starting to happen. We have not gone farther than that and started major furloughs and layoffs at this point, Congressman, because we are hopeful that your efforts are going to succeed and did not want to take that significant action, which has a further negative impact on the broader economy, as well as impacting municipal operations. In that we are hopeful that your efforts will be successful and that municipalities will be treated by Congress as other industries that have been impacted by the pandemic have been. If that relief is not forthcoming soon, we will reach the point where we will have to go further and really start making cuts that will significantly impact municipal operations. Right. One last really thing I wanted to point out is, Vermont is doing so well in its virus suppression efforts, really has charted a different course than so much of the country. Municipalities here in Vermont have been a big part of that. Burlington certainly has been very active in partnering with the state on a variety of virus suppression efforts once we have had outbreaks here. I know Mayor Lott and Winooski and City Manager Baker also worked very hard when there was a concerning outbreaks about a month ago that impacted Winooski and Burlington. I know other municipalities have taken firm actions as well. We have been able to do that by standing up whole new operations that didn't exist pre-COVID. We have what we call a resource and recovery center that has responded to more than 1,500 calls for help from Burlingtonians of one sort or another since the pandemic began. We are reaching the limits of our ability to continue funding efforts like that confidently with the resources we have available to us. And so I do think you will have a compromised COVID response from municipalities if something doesn't change soon in terms of the financial picture. On the flip side of that, and my final point is, instead of that kind of negative picture of oncoming cutbacks, further economic impact, reduced efforts to fight the virus, if municipalities if our revenues are replaced, if funding's along the lines of what you sketched out in the HEROES Act becomes possible, municipalities instead will become, I think, a real force for ensuring that America's response to come back here is fueled. Municipalities have the potential to really be a force for stimulus and for making the country that we have on the other side of this virus a better country than the one that went in, if you give that ability to act. So thanks for the chance to share those thoughts.
Well, thank you. That's pretty impressive. And, actually, the way you were saying and Maura was saying, it really is a unique role that the local government has to play, because it is there that people live. And it's what's done within that community that's going to make a real difference for people. Our job in Washington is to get those resources back, but the execution and the implementation has to be done at the local level ultimately. And that response that you have, 1,500 responses, that's 1,500 people with a real problem. And then they have a place they can call and get a real person providing a real response. And I think we can't forget how essential it is that there be the human touch here. And the federal government can't do that. I mean, we can get the revenue back and people can make their decisions, but it really ultimately, the well-being of our communities is going to be very much tied to your capacity to continue doing some of those things that you've described, Moreau.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that, Congressman. I think that's exactly right. I guess I should, just before you quote that nationally or something, say some of those calls were people offering help. We are coordinating volunteer efforts as well, so the people who want to help are included in those responses.
Yeah, but that's great. That's the point. People want to help. Everyone wants to do something that's useful. And for most of Vermonters, no matter how hard the situation is for them, they always look and say, well, it's tougher over there. Let me help out. So that's exactly. that needs to be fostered and channeled. So that's really, thank you.
I know it's a congressional priority to see schools reopen and see college campuses reopen. Municipalities are boots on the ground, helping those goals get achieved as well. We're very active working with our school district, trying to give them additional supports necessary for a safe reopening. We are intensely involved with UVM and Champlain colleges reopening. So I do think that sense that we are your kind of foot soldiers to, turn this around if we are properly coordinated is a really important thing to be understood in Washington.
Right. Thank you. I agree with that.
Great. So next we're going to hear from Ken Lindsley, who's the chair of the Danville Select Board.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Congressman Welch, thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah.
Our budget was passed at town meeting day this year, our 2020 budget, and there was not a face mask in sight. And since that time, the world has changed.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, our greatest concerns right now are budgetary. Our expenses will be higher although not significantly higher than we had planned, and we expect those expenses to be covered by state and federal programs. Our greater concern is the unknown effect on property tax payments that normally we would have sent the tax bills out by now, but we've been delayed because of the change in the federal reporting from April to July 15th. And that has had an impact on the state determination on any tax credits. So that's kind of an unknown for us at this point in time. Normally, when we send the tax bills out, which is the last week in July or the first week in August, the very next week we'll start to receive income. Well, we have not sent those bills out yet because of the situation with the timing. And so we're going to be delayed, and that will probably cause us to continue our loans and the interest necessary to support those loans, the tax anticipation notes. The other aspect, of course, is what is going to happen to tax payment delinquencies. And we've had people that are out of work. We've been fortunate on the town level where all of our employees, we maintain their employment and full employment, no issues. But other residents of town have unfortunately been displaced from their jobs. And this is going to have potentially an impact on the town. That's an unknown, but of deep concern to us. So those are the issues that we face from the small town of Danville, but we will face them and we will carry on.
Well, that I appreciate the can-do attitude, but the reality is that if we don't continue some federal assistance, then there's going to be massive layoffs at local government level. In 2008, the loss of employment at state and local level was immense, and it had a real impact on those individuals, on the services that our communities could provide, and it really was something that helped prolong the recession. And what you've been able to do, and Moreau just mentioned you were able to do with respect to employment, is not being done around the country. There's about 10% a reduction in jobs at the state and local level already, and it's more than what we had in the Great Recession. So it's a testament to your approach to this. But you're not going to be able to sustain that indefinitely, especially if all those folks in your town who aren't working continue without a job or continue not having aid to help pay these bills. But congratulations to you on what you've accomplished so far.
Thank you.
Next, we've invited Delcy Hoyt to give the perspective on West Fairleigh. So if you're trying to unmute yourself,
I got it.
Okay.
I got it. Hit the right button.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman Welch, for this opportunity. West Fairleigh is, we're the micro town. And I always remind people we're not a village of Fairleigh. We are a town unto ourselves of 675, but we're that, we're not on the way to anywhere. We have very little in terms of visible.
You're on the way to Baker's store.
There, exactly, exactly. We don't have the visible businesses for the most part, although I would note that we have just recently, our village store has closed. And you know how difficult those kinds of small businesses are to keep open in the best of situations. We're hopeful that little central piece of our village will be revived. But we're a commuter community. We're the affordable real estate, and so it means that we are the workforce housing for the greater Lebanon area and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of people really have been hurting. And fortunately, we have a huge banding with Vershire, another small town, a huge food distribution program, volunteer effort that's continues and is doing very well. But there are just a lot of our community we share much of what Ken said in terms of the uncertainty about what's going to happen as taxes come in, whether those revenues are going to be there for us. We've have the overall effect, of just seeing we can't reduce our staffing or cut those aspects of our budget, or we wouldn't have a town government at all, in that sort of micro town. But in looking at funding coming through that's going to be essential, definitely being proportionate. We see that. I feel a little embarrassed, hearing from the mayor of Burlington, the types of programs that they've stood up that are absolutely essential to them, and where we're sort of hunkering down and getting the job done. But in that broader community ecosystem that you were talking about, we both are looking at being concerned about our market centers. We're reliant on the Bradfords of the world because they have the infrastructure. Another small town, but we're even reliant upon them to have that. The grocery stores, the businesses there. Locally, looking at some of our smallest businesses, the need to keep them afloat for that keeping our community strong and working here as well. And I do want to just give a little shout out to the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development, which that economic relief grant. I'm involved with an Artisans Guild in St. Johnsbury, which is a cooperative craft gallery, a state craft center. And we just received, a tiny bit of money, in the grand scheme of things. It is what's going to keep us afloat. We've been in business for 23 years. So there's tiny bits of money that sort of being proportionate to some of the businesses and to the municipalities that really is going to make the difference of keeping that community strong and keeping the local businesses strong, even those invisible sole proprietorships, that those $5,000 grants, those $10,000 grants that are absolutely essential, that do make a huge impact to the health of our community overall. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I'm very glad you said that, because that Artisan Guild, that it's so important that be there when we're on the other side of this, just as much as it's important to Burlington that the Flynn be there. We don't want to have these devastated communities. And people are healthy, they want to go back to work, but they don't have the businesses, and the community that they spent decades building has vanished. That can't happen. So thank you for that.
Great. So we are now going to turn to open discussion and question and answers. I also want to mention that representatives from the congressional delegation are here. So from Senator Leahy's office, Chris Saunders is with us. And from Senator Sanders' office, we have Haley Perro. And they're also happy to answer any questions that folks may have. And in terms of the order, I am just going to call people in the order that I see raised hands. So hopefully we'll be able to get through as many as many as we can. And so first off, Joseph Ronan from Sharon, Vermont. I believe Select Board Chair from Sharon.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much. I am from Sharon. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. We're a lot like, I would say, Danville and West Fairleigh, so I won't repeat what you just heard from them. Same kind of situation.
Can you give me a glass of water? Go ahead.
Yep. So I would say we are sending out our tax bills. We're just making it up and sending it out. We don't really know what the right answer is, but that's kind of where we are.
Done, right?
Yeah. Two quick things for you. One, I listened to the broadcast from the National League of Cities on the same topic, and it was remarkable to me to hear how distrustful people are of governors and state governments. They basically were saying, you know what, we don't really believe we'll get anything if it's not allocated directly to us. And this is, people in big cities. This is LA. This is, San Antonio. I mean, it's not Sharon. So that's one point. It was striking to me to hear that. The second thing is a question, which is kind of where are we on doing something about medical coverage for people who are affected by, losing their jobs through this and the downturn in the economy.
Thanks.
My sense is we're still kind of nowhere. I mean, we've said things about, okay, you can get a free COVID test, which is nice. And I hear that the bill might provide some funding for airline employees who are losing their jobs. But what's the answer for people who have lost their jobs? And I know you can buy Cobra, which is, great, except for the fact that it's ridiculously expensive and you just lost your job. So I'll shut up and let you talk.
Well, two things. One, one of the ills that plagues our society these days is that lack of trust. Trust is an important lubricant to get things done. So it's disturbing, but not surprising, what you described in that phone call. And I think we're fortunate in Vermont because I think there's a higher level of trust than comes in many ways out of our town meeting tradition, where I'm at town meeting arguing one side of the school budget and my colleague or my neighbor is arguing the other side, and it's a fierce argument. And then I leave and drop my son or daughter off at Little League, and there that person is coaching my son or daughter. That's a good thing. On COVID and the healthcare expenses, my view on this is that this has to be a federal expense. This is a pandemic. It's once in 100 years. And in our first bill, we had legislation that in the CARES Act that would have paid for folks directly affected by COVID. Now, what's happening is that, interestingly enough, the healthcare insurance companies are reporting record profits, okay? And under the Affordable Care, the reason they're reporting record profits is that people have not been able to get their so-called elective health care. Elective is not just something like cosmetic surgery. It's like a knee replacement. It's like just the many things that are everyday requirements. And under the Affordable Care Act, there should be some recapture of those excess profits that are so much higher than the premiums that are paid. And I would see that as a source of funding to help pay for the folks who don't have any coverage as a result of losing their job as a result of COVID. So that's my point of view on it. Now, in all candor, there's a wicked argument that's been underway in Washington ever since the Affordable Care Act got passed. And even as we speak, there's an effort on the part of the administration to repeal the Affordable Care Act without any replacement. And obviously, I disagree with that, particularly when 5 million people who before COVID had jobs that did provide health care. The only option they have that's income-based is to get on Obamacare, as it's being called. So that's a thorny battle that's been underway, and it has much more to do, in my view, with ideology than it does to meeting the practical needs of our society and the challenges folks have when they have healthcare expenses. So that's ongoing, but there's a significant number of us that do believe that the COVID-related expenses are they're unique, with businesses, with individuals, and with our healthcare needs. Thank you. And thanks for your good work in Sharon.
Next, I see a raised hand from Charles Sufford of Stowe. Oh, we can't hear you.
Hi, sorry about the delay. Thank you,
Hey, Charles.
Congressman Welch, for your time today and to VLCT
Hi,
for
Charles.
setting this up. Good to see you again.
Good to
Hope
see
we
you.
can visit again soon. Snow's still beautiful, but we're going to head into winter and our ski season soon, and it's pretty tough sledding around here, as you can imagine. Vermont is heavily dependent on travel and tourism in general, and Stowe in particular, a number of other ski towns and others. To add on to what Ken was saying, we're starting to see an increase in delinquencies of our commercial properties, particularly some of our hotels, which is concerning. Vermont allows abatement when folks aren't able to pay. And the particular challenge we face is if their taxes are abated because they're not able to pay, we still owe state education taxes. And so the towns make the state education fund whole. So it's compounded, which is a real concern to us as this becomes protracted. I will also say there's some other things that may be of interest. We're seeing about a 30% reduction in our utility usage so far. And we still have a lot of fixed debt costs to pay for those infrastructure upgrades to meet our environmental and public health safety requirements. We're projecting about half of our local option tax on rooms, meals, and alcohol, which will give you an indicator. So we typically get about $1 million. We'll be down to 500,000 in order to advance our capital projects approved at annual meeting, which are deemed essential. We're going to have to draw down all our reserves. So we're essentially going to be one emergency away from not having any running on empty in terms of funding capital repairs. Our EMS, we have a local EMS, and we've got about half the calls because visitors are down in the community at the same time. So that means about a loss of $200,000, but we are still in the position to have greater personnel requirements because the cleaning and protocols required to respond. So I just wanted to give some context of, what's emerging. We appreciate your efforts at the federal level. You've always been good to Vermont and with your efforts, and as the rest of our delegation has, but it's very real down here, and as this becomes protracted, it's getting more and more real as we go along.
Yeah, Charles, thank you for that. That is actually my worry. These expenses just keep coming in. You've got new expenses to meet the protocols, and what's been, in all candor, very, very frustrating to me is that the most important thing is to get the infection rate down. And we've done a good job in Vermont on that. But this can't be done one state here and another state there, but everybody in between willy-nilly. It just doesn't work. And it's been a source of enormous frustration to me that the things that have to be done at the federal level nationally in the executive department, like getting a testing protocol, like having a simple test that you can get the results in a timely way in 2 days or even right away. These things have to be done everywhere in order for there to be confidence that you can really reopen everywhere. And we're not there yet. That's the thing that's worrying me. I've noticed in the last week the infection rate around the country is going down some, but it really exploded. And there is the wear and tear of this going on and on and on. I mean, you just described it with like the EMS budget. You can cobble things together for a period of time, but there's a point if it goes on too long where it wears folks down and where it wears down the fiscal capacity to do duct tape and baling wire. So it's why one of the reasons I think it's so wonderful in Vermont that the infection rate has been under control, but we need the whole nation to be doing that. Other countries have. It's doable. It's really straightforward. It's testing, social distancing, hygiene, contact tracing, quarantine. but we've got a ways to go. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Watson, the mayor of Montpelier, had her hand raised, but her internet connection's not great. So she's going to send the question via chat. So next we're going to turn to the mayor of Winooski, Christine Lott.
Thank you. Mayor Weinberger mentioned the added cost of the outbreak response. I just wanted to quickly share, we spent about $30,000 just in staff time supporting logistics, food delivery to quarantined folks, working with community partners to try to get the right response here. We raise 1 penny on our tax rate, raises only $50,000. So we're not talking about insignificant cost increase in a small community with a small budget. And on top of that, a lot of the lost revenues that folks are discussing. We here had been relying on a new local options tax to fund some capital projects. And the loss of that revenue and the great other revenue losses and financial uncertainty are just further deteriorating our ability to keep up with preventive maintenance and make improvements here. So there's that balance of added expense and reduced revenues. And I just wanted to add too that I am hearing that there are still a lot of folks here who are unemployed, who are concerned about, with the school situation, still not being able to go back to work. So we're just hearing a need for help.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as long as the virus is ruling, people are going to need help. I mean, we can't be operating in the normal way when that virus is unleashed. In Vermont can't do this alone. We're doing a good job, but I'm hearing that. I mean, I'm getting around. We get calls in our office, and there's a lot of folks who are hanging on, but don't know how much longer they can.
Yeah. So next we have Herb Durfee from Norwich.
Congressman Welch, how are you today on your sunny day?
Hi. Yeah. Hi. Hi, Herb. Good to see you.
Yeah. Just a couple things. I think with regard to Norwich, we're one of the communities that I think is faring fairly well. We don't have the local option tax or anything. Unemployment is about 4.4%. We've sent out our tax bills, though we know administratively we're going to have a host of revised tax bills to go out due to the Homestead Declaration. But I think some of the things that have popped up in our particular community where maybe some funding could be focused, mental health issues are becoming fairly huge in this area. Mm-hmm. I know that's been mentioned quite a few times. Interestingly, the domestic assaults are going up dramatically, even in our Upper Valley region, which you wouldn't expect, but it definitely is. And I think that's just because we're all cooped up. So I do think that if there are some of those funds that could be targeted to mental health, domestic situations that could help to improve that, or having the resources available to help those folks, that would be great. I'm also hearing, from our school area that maybe there's some school subsidies that could be dealt with for creative education. The Marion Cross School in our area is kind of looking at outdoor situations. I know the Danes do it, but it's great to be doing some outdoor stuff like today, where it's all sunny and warm. But when it comes February 5th, that makes it a little bit more difficult. So I know you just need more thicker clothing at that point, but I do think that if there is some funding that could work toward creative education, that would be great. And then one other thing is the broadband expansion. We've talked about that for many years in Vermont and throughout the nation, but if we're getting into a little bit more of a remote situation with folks, we do need funding for broadband expansion, and then vouchers or some kind of subsidies for school-age families that can't afford the various cable company costs from that standpoint, at least during the course of the school year. So if there is remote education going on, that we don't have a child that can't afford a tablet or a laptop or the internet connection from the cable companies. Other than that, I really appreciate you taking the time out from your time frame. I have a sneaking suspicion I know where you are right now, but it's nice to see you enjoying the birds and the sun in your backyard.
Yeah, well, that you're right on your suspicion, Herb. But I'll be down in Dan Witt's before the day is out. But I just want to say on broad, there's some room for optimism here. All right, and I'll tell you why. This pandemic is a great leveler, and my Republican colleagues, when I talk to them about broadband, they say exactly what you said. And they're getting behind the federal government taking on responsibility with broadband, the same as what it did with electricity in the 1930s. It is absolutely essential. It's not optional. And my Republican colleagues we're on the same page. I started the Rural Broadband Caucus, and it's a lot of Republicans in there. Because when I talk to them, just on the level of what are the challenges your people face, they're identical to what you just described, all right? And of course, with the need for broadband, not just to do homework, but to go to school, the need for broadband to do work, because you have to do it remotely. And of course, for medical appointments, broadband has been a tremendous tool. So we just have to have it, and we're getting more bipartisan support for that commitment. And, I have some confidence we'll get there. I mean, we should have been there, but we're on the same page on that. Thank you.
Congressman, we have a question from Mayor Watson. She says, I understand that the discussion around funding for states and municipalities has been delayed. I'm curious for Congressman Welch's thoughts on the chances of that bill passing or any anticipated timeline for that negotiation.
Well, Ann, I think I have some confidence it will pass. Here's the way it is. We have in the CARES Act, the HEROES Act, which we passed in the House 11 weeks ago, all right? Vermont would get $3 billion, and the municipalities would get $500 million of that. It's opposed by Senator McConnell in the Senate, which is a problem, obviously. But what I was just saying to Herb, my Republican colleagues are hearing the same thing from their mayors and their governors that I'm hearing from you and from Governor Scott. We need some money. I mean, this is universal, because what happened to your budgets happened to the budgets of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So they're advocating, many of my Republican colleagues are advocating, especially for local aid. They think that's really, really important. And I think a number of the Senate Republicans are in disagreement with Senator McConnell. So because this is a universal need, and doing this is not like a partisan win, it's just helping our communities wherever they are, whatever the political makeup is of those communities. All of those communities have suffered a revenue collapse because of COVID. So I see that as the strongest argument and gives me the most confidence that will ultimately get some success. The way things are right now, Ann, is the negotiations, Speaker Pelosi is representing the House position, broadly shared on the state aid, by the way, and local aid by Republicans in these negotiations. Right now, the Trump administration is resisting it, and Senator McConnell is. But I think that's got to change because of what I just said. Namely, it's a universal problem across America. And the clock is ticking. The unemployment aid is expired. The pain is still out there, and these negotiations are literally underway. There was some positive comments from Speaker Pelosi saying that she saw light at the end of the tunnel. She just didn't know how long the tunnel was. But in our last caucus, there was some indication that we should all be on standby to be prepared to be voting next week. So I can't be specific, but that's the state of negotiations. And I know you need that help.
The next raised hand is Elaine Haney from the Vermont Agency of Commerce.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Congressman, for
Hi,
hosting
Elaine.
this meeting. I'm not wearing my ACCD hat today, although I thank
okay.
you for the acknowledgement of our work with the recovery grants. I'm wearing my...
You guys, by the way, are doing a good job.
Thank you. We're working very hard.
Yeah, and I like those micro grants. I mean, that's so important. You know, we in Vermont know how essential those are. The federal government doesn't know it. So you guys are key. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll pass that on to the secretary. I'm actually wearing my hat as chair of the Town of Essex Select Board.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to echo and agree with many of the comments of my colleagues, particularly around anticipated delinquencies. We just had our most recent Board of Civil Authority or Board of Abatement meeting, and normally we call those, every several months because we have like 1 or 2 cases. I think we had half a dozen cases, and every one of them was related to COVID, and that was for the March 15th payment. So we're really anticipating an onslaught in September when our next payments are due. We're very concerned about delinquencies. Essex's unemployment rate topped out at over 13%. It's now down to 9, but that's 9. That's very high for us. And so I'm very concerned about property taxes and people's ability to pay them. And the other thing that I'd like to echo is the desperate need for broadband support. Because we're such a large town, we're fortunate to be in the position we're currently identifying sites where we can hold daycare operations for kids K through 8 that have Wi-Fi. And so we're working with the school district to staff those places and make sure they're clean and safe, and provide these services for free to our residents. We're trying very hard to make it free. But the combination of the need for broadband, because there's a lot of rural areas in Essex that have terrible broadband, and the need for affordable childcare for essential workers who cannot, and single parents who our schools are going all remote or hybrid, and they need some place to put their kids. So we're really fortunate that we can step up and offer those spaces, but we're looking at a very expensive program for this. And so support for enhanced daycare and enhanced broadband would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, Peter, you're on mute.
I wanted to thank Elaine for that. It's really wonderful to listen to the people who actually have to make it happen. I mean, talking about the practical challenge of daycare and the steps that you see need to be taken, and then taking those steps. It's what we were talking about earlier, where we at the federal level have to get some resources back, but it won't get done without alert and engaged local leadership, because these practical issues, where can you find a site? How do you get the staffing so you can clean it? How do you make the connection between the parent who's got the child in the child care center? I mean, these are all significant tasks, and they have to be done. You're willing to do it, but you have to have the resources so you can. And it's renewing my sense of urgency about getting aid back to our local communities so that you can do that kind of work in each of your communities that Elaine was just describing.
Great. So we're almost out of time, but we only have 2 more questions. So I think we'll try to get to the last 2 questions. Also from Essex, we have Owiso Makuku, who is the Community Development Director there.
Hi, my apologies if my reception is spotty. I'm in Heinsberg right now, and even being in Chittenden County doesn't help with broadband necessarily. So I won't repeat anything that Elaine brought up, but we are trying to apply ingenuity. to different problems as all of the other towns are with respect to supporting our businesses and our residents. My question is about is specifically, has any consideration been given to the increase of lost revenues and impacts as we move into the flu season? Is there a federal and or state plan for seasonal increases in some of the problems that we're facing right now, in addition to the fact that we're moving into a colder season? As I sit outside to get the best broadband reception as I can, to be able to communicate with you right now. And just thank you for all of your efforts and now and moving forward.
Well, thank you. Actually, what I've heard our public health authorities express apprehension about with the onset of flu season is that people will not get vaccinated or get the flu shots to the same degree as we've had in the past. And what I understand is that it's really important you get your flu shot. But as far as doing something supplemental in aid because of the flu, no, I don't think that has actually been under discussion. The discussion is really about trying to have robust response with aid, including to our municipalities for the effects of COVID.
Oh, sure. I understand that I was talking about the impacts and effects of the flu season on top of COVID, as well as the fact that we are moving into not tomorrow, but as we move into the fall and winter season here in Vermont.
Right. Yeah. As I said, I know that public health authorities are really concerned about the flu season, and they think that it could make things could be worse if people don't get their flu shots at the same level of participation as has been the case in the past. But I don't know that there's the connection that you're making. I'm not quite sure has been addressed.
Well, thank you. And actually, even just that information that we need to do flu shot promotion in Essex and throughout Vermont, I think is really useful.
No, get your flu shot.
Yep.
Great. So
Thank you.
Our final question will be from Chad Whitehead, who is the St. Johnsbury town manager.
Thank you. And thank you, Congressman Welch, for your time.
Yeah. Hi, Chad.
Two topics. One, and I'm glad that Delise mentioned the Artisans Guild here in St. Jay, but prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, St. Jay was working hard on several economic development initiatives. And we were also kind of running hand in hand and side by side with Catamount Arts and the creative economy and everything that's going on there. And that's kind of key to our ability to attract and retain growth in this region, and I'm sure it is everywhere in Vermont. Coming out of this, there needs to be some significant injections of funding to ensure that those efforts aren't lost and they can get restarted, because a lot of those creative economy pieces are just on hold. And they're going to be essential for us. The second one is maybe a little more specific to St. Jay, but I think everybody else is dealing with these things too, at least in some level, is our public safety facilities are severely outdated, and we're working on plans that we're going to be ready to try to build a new fire police station. But the impact on taxes and the concerns is going to make it difficult for us to bond these things moving forward. And then fear if we don't get these facilities built, or we have to come up with the funds to do it, we could lose these services, the police service and the fire service, just out of affordability. And that doesn't just impact St. Johnsbury, but it impacts our entire region. So those are just my 2 points.
Well, look, those are good points. And I'm really, really glad you talked about the creative economy. I mean, Catamount Arts is revered, and it has a footprint well beyond St. Johnsbury, where it started. And I can't imagine St. Jay without Catamount Arts. And it's one of the reasons why I want aid to be focused on helping some of our creative economy nonprofit organizations that are so much contributors to the texture of local life. Secondly, on the police and fire stations, I've been up there. You know, you got a modest operation going on.
I hear people talk about their stations being ready to replace because they're 30 years old. And ours was built in the 30s. So
right. No, I know that. And again, this is the infrastructure bill that the House passed about 6 weeks ago. Move America Forward. We all know that our infrastructure, and that's not just roads and bridges, it's municipal buildings, it's our schools. I was up in Gilman, in Lunenburg, and in Gilman, the school they have there that are 24 kids graduated from. The basement was kind of a swamp. It's on, and it needs to be dry. But we know that we've neglected our infrastructure for years. And we also know that if we invest in infrastructure, that's something that's going to boost the economy. It's good for us to do that. So again, there's been action in the House on that. And whether we do or don't get that through the Senate, we've established a template for action after America makes its decision in the next election. And I think that the new Congress would be all ready to act on that. And there's a huge pent-up demand, and it's from everywhere from a town manager like you in St. Jay to Governor Scott, knowing that we need help to to improve our infrastructure. So thank you, Chad.
Yeah, if you forward us the funds, we'll put them in the ground, I promise.
Shovel ready.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for staying on the call. We went a little bit over, but we were able to answer all the questions. So that's great. And Congressman Welch, do you want to say any closing remarks?
I want to say thank you. I'm just really I'm impressed and humbled by local leadership, because it's dealing with real problems that real people face. And it's always doing it without enormous amount of resources. You're trying to figure out how to do it on a tight budget all of the time. And it has to be done. And that trust that somebody spoke about early on, if we don't have that at the local level, we don't have it anywhere. And you're under the most scrutiny. You're the most accountable because people are checking over your shoulder all of the time. And I just want to salute you for the work that you're doing, and acknowledge that your leadership is going to be crucial for us to get through this. So thank you very, very much for taking your time to be with me on this call.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.